Hello Forkies, today I'm gonna show you how to refute the Hillbilly Attack in the Caro-Kann Defense. So of course the Caro-Kann Defense is a very common opening at all levels of chess, and it starts after the move pawn to e4, and now we play the Caro-Kann with the move pawn to c6, trying to play d5 on the next move. And there is a lot of variations in the Caro-Kann Defense, and you can check all of them covered in my channel. But today we'll take a look at a very dubious line and uncommon variation, which is to play bishop to c4. And this is of course a very bad move, because black is trying to push d5 in the center of the board, and now d5 will happen and the bishop will be attacked. But of course the idea of the Hillbilly Attack is not to take and then play either bishop b5 or bishop to b3, but the main idea is to simply play bishop b3 now and to gambit this e4 pawn. And yes, this should be quote unquote how to play the position, but it is actually a big sideline, because after takes, now of course queen h5 is an idea to threaten not checkmate but to win the game anyway, because queen takes on f7 would simply be very bad of course for black. And now black has few options. The most commonly played move is to push e6, preventing any idea to take on f7, but the best move in the position by far is to play g6 instead. And as you can see, the best move, and not the best, but the most commonly played move in the position is to play queen to h4, attacking the pawn. And of course, queen to h4 is the most popular move between all of the retreating moves, and even Magnus Carlsen has played this move recently. But queen to h4 is not the best move actually, because we can play the very good move bishop to f5, and this is the refutation to the Hillbilly Attack. But bishop to f5 has never been played on the highest level of chess. Everybody developed their knight with the move knight to f6, simply defending the pawn. But after knight to c3, attacking the pawn anyway, there is no good way to... I mean, you can play bishop f5 now, but allowing knight to c3, and this knight simply doesn't want to go here, because we want to play e6 and trying to trade off queens. So yes, bishop f5 is a possibility, but then h3 and g4 will simply trap the bishop or lose this pawn. And black has, of course, an extra pawn, but white will develop maybe f3, developing the bishop, and will get a lot of initiative down the board. So simply developing the knight with the move knight to f6 is not the best. So I recommend you to play the best move by the computer, which is to play bishop to f5. And now white's idea is actually to gambit, not gambit, but not to try to win this e4 pawn back, and simply say, yes, I'm down a pawn, excuse me, but I will generate an attack. So pawn to f3 is the best move, and after takes, knight takes, there is our idea to push e6. And of course, if queens disappear from the board, we are up a full pawn. Up a full pawn on e6 actually. And you might ask, well, what about h3, g4, trying to trap the bishop? Well, h5. Maybe knight f6, bishop g7, rook here, maybe bring the king to the king side. And this position is much better for black. And if we play all the top moves by the computer, this should be enough to win the game. This is -2 for black, which is of course completely winning. So after the move bishop to f5 here, white has another idea, not to push f3, but to play knight to c3, attacking the pawn here. And after knight to c3, we don't play knight to f6, transposing to the previously covered line, we play e6, and there is simply no way to take the pawn, because we take their queen. And if they take our queen, well, then the pawn is simply defended. And yes, once again, h3 is a move trying to play g4, and this would actually win the game for white. So simply h5. Simply h5. And now g4, of course, can't be played because it blunders a pawn. So now simply knight g to e2, I guess, trying to develop maybe castle, Maybe to prepare d3, f3 can't be played anymore because the knight has developed. So now play this very accurate move, pawn to a5, trying to play knight a6 and knight to c5, or to push b5 followed by a4. So this a5 move might seem very strange to you, but it is actually a very good move. And of course, after knight g3 attacking the bishop, attacking the pawn here, we simply play knight to f6 defending the pawn, and there is simply no way to generate enough attacking pieces to attack this e5 pawn. Excuse me, e4 pawn, of course. And this is simply the end of the game. If we play all the top moves, we should be much, much better, if not already winning in this position. So, after the move knight to c3, we just looked at this move. Well, this is simply bad. And there is no other way to play this position. You can play f3 or knight to c3, but you will be worse with the white pieces, and with the black pieces you should be much, much better, and you accomplish to refute the hillbilly attack. So after the move g6, there are two other moves white can choose. Queen h4 is of course the most popular move, but queen to e5 might very well just be played by your opponent. Of course, thinking, oh, this is a fork, I'm forking pawn and the rook in the corner, and you need to play like f6 to defend the rook. But this is not true. You can just play knight to f6, defending the rook, of course, trying to stop the attack of the rook, and simply defending the pawn once again. And now knight to c3 should be played by white, but there is simply no time to get the pawn back. Why? We play knight b d7 attacking the queen, and after queen d4 everything seems okay for white. I will simply take the pawn, but no, we play queen to b6 attacking the queen once again. And if takes, we can take with the knight, but I guess taking with the pawn pushing b5, playing knight to c5 is better, and of course the pawn is still defended. So if they don't take our queen, they will have to play something like queen to c4, simply threatening mate, or not mate because we have king to d8. But we simply play the move knight to e5. Once again, there is no time to deliver check, mate, or to take the pawn. This is another tempo move. And now after queen to e2, just queen d4 defending everything in the position, centralizing the queen. There is no way to attack our pawn, and we are simply a healthy pawn up. Maybe you can play f3, but then even the knights will get off the board. Bishop f5 will be played. We can choose to castle long or to develop the bishop and then castle short. So this position should be much, much better for black, if not winning once again. So this move queen e5 here after the move g6 is not really playable, but the best engine move after pawn to g6 here is to play queen to e2 actually. And this is a very unknown move to this point. And of course the idea is to take the pawn with your queen or maybe with your knight in the future. So we simply give away the pawn. We play bishop to g7. And now white has actually two choices. Either he simply take the pawn, saying that he likes, I don't know, this kind of position where bishop f5 and castles and queen c7, knight b d7 will be played, saying, yes, I will have the same exact material as my opponent, but I will suffer because I will be underdeveloped. Look at black's position and look at white's poor development. So this is one way of playing. Then maybe just d4 here, castles, I don't know, knight f3, knight b d7, queen c7. This is all very good. But after queen e2, bishop g7, there is one more move white can try. And this is to play knight to c3, attacking the pawn once again. But now we simply play the move knight to f6 now, defending our pawn. And after something like takes, now we can take back, which would be just fine, developing our bishop, and then simply castling, and look at these two powerful bishops here on these two diagonals. So black will have, excuse me, white will have difficult time developing the queen side. Why? Because simply like d3 or maybe yes d3 knight b d7, simply you cannot really develop this bishop to an active square because the b2 pawn is simply hanging with an attack on the rook. So yes, this version to play bishop b3 here, and then queen h5, you should know that e6 is not particularly good move. Why? Because after pawn to e6, well, after pawn to e6, we block in this bishop from c8. Yes, this is a pretty normal position here. Maybe knight f6 with a tempo, maybe queen e2. This pawn will be won by white. We can develop, yes, but after something like takes here, knight bd7, knight here, and queen to e2, you can see we have a very solid position. This bishop on b3 is misplaced, but our bishop will have a bad time developing to an active square. So after simple castling, maybe trying to play d4, I don't know what's black's idea actually is. Maybe knight d4, but after something like d4 c3, then simply bishop c2, and this bishop is perfectly placed on this long diagonal. So e6 here, excuse me, is not particularly good move, blocking in the bishop. So pawn to g6 should be played after queen h4, and you should have very decent winning chances after g6, and simply developing, not defending the pawn as much as we can, and simply giving an initiative not to white because they have zero initiative, but we'll try to attack white actually with something like h5 preventing anything. Then maybe h4 h3 can be played, and we have solid position. But this is of course not everything. After e4 c6, bishop c4, and d5, we just looked at the move bishop to b3, but there is a way to capture the pawn and then play either bishop b3 or bishop b5 check. And bishop b5 is the most common way to play the hillbilly attack actually, and it is the best way of playing. So bishop b3 is simply a very bad move, because after bishop f5, something like d4, e6, you look at these bishops. I will just conquer the board, and this bishop is simply misplaced on b3. This is actually kind of an exchange variation of the Caro-Kann defense, but this bishop is on b3 instead of being on d3, where it would actually do something. So after something like knight f3, knight c6, something like, I don't know, here maybe castling and then playing bishop d6. Look at these bishops. I will play knight f6, I will castle queen c7, and attacking down the queen side should be much better for black. So you shouldn't really play bishop, you shouldn't take the pawn and then play bishop b3. This simply doesn't make sense here. You should instead, after takes, you should play bishop to b5 check in this position. And now there is only one good option. Of course, you need to play knight to c6, blocking the check. And now white's idea is to play knight f3 and knight to e5, pressuring the pinned knight. So after knight to f3, we shouldn't really allow knight to e5 to happen. Of course, we don't play f6 either. We play bishop to g4, pinning the knight, therefore it can't move to e4. And now white's idea is to attack the bishop and expand on the king side, and then play knight e5 anyway. So this is what happens: h3, bishop h5, g4, bishop g6, and now knight to e5, attacking the knight. And of course, we need to defend the knight, and the best move to defend is queen to c7, attacking the knight. Now taking here is not really good, because after h takes on g6, the h file opens up. We can even sack the knight in some positions where the queen is no longer on this diagonal. Maybe e6, bishop d6, and simply conquering down this diagonal. So taking the bishop is not good in this position. You should play pawn to d4 instead, and after, of course, defending the knight. And you cannot really play f4 defending the knight, because after bishop e4, I don't know, rook f1, I guess, e6. I mean, these two bishops are, again, very good pieces. Maybe even something like long castles and then taking the knight can be played, but simply d4 should be played every single game from this point. So e6 now is the best move, and after h4, now now white is threatening to play h5, and simply our bishop would be hanging here, or it would be trapped here on e4 actually. So how to deal with this? If you play something like h6, then knight takes on g6, and look at this ugly king, look at these ugly pawns here. this is just losing for black straightforwardly. Something like queen d3 attacking here, castling f4, f5, opening up the king side. You should be winning with the white pieces here. So after h4, we yes play bishop to e4 here. And what about f3? Well, you don't play bishop g6 back, losing the bishop, but you play pawn to f6 instead. Excuse me. And after knight takes on c6, b takes on c6, of course attacking the bishop. And now the only move to play is to take the bishop here. You cannot play bishop a4. Why? Because queen g3 followed by something like, excuse me, what? Yes, something like bishop f3 should win the game on the spot. So after f takes on e4 here, taking the piece, we can play queen g3 firstly, attacking the king here. And after king to f1, we simply take our bishop back. And the material, as you can see, is equal. But we are threatening to attack all the white pawns here. We'll develop our bishop. Maybe even if this pawn ever moves to c5, we'll play rook c8, knight e7, and we'll castle short here. Maybe we can try to play h5 until we castle short to simply try to open up white's king here. And definitely this position is much better for black. Actually, it is only like minus 0.5 for black by the computer, but practically speaking, this is much better for white. And this was simply how to refute the hillbilly attack straightforwardly. If they take the pawn, we simply take back, and bishop b3 is simply much worse. We need to give check, and then we have this position at the end. For black, I mean, this is just dream come true, right? What can you even imagine with the black pieces to achieve? This king is very weak here. And the other main variation is to play queen to h5 and gambit this pawn. And after g6, you should remember queen h4 will almost likely be played like every single game. Queen e5 is bad, and queen to e2, you simply give away the pawn after knight c3. You just develop, your bishop will go to f5, you will castle queen c7 or queen b6. Your position should be amazing. And yes, this was how to refute the hillbilly attack after bishop to c4. And if you guys liked the video, please consider subscribing, it would really help me out. And see you guys in another video. Bye bye.